Son, these savings are for emergencies, I whispered while he emptied my bank account right in front of me. By the time I realized it had been only the first of many times, it was already too late. I always believed a parent is for life, but I never imagined that would mean being robbed by my own son for years. He smiled as he told me he would take care of everything, but the only care he had was for the money that didn't belong to him. But before I continue, make sure you're already subscribed to the channel and drop a comment telling us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far our stories travel. It was an ordinary Tuesday afternoon when I heard the words that changed my life forever. Marcus, my 37-year-old son, was sitting at my kitchen table, sipping the coffee I had just poured. Sunlight came through the window, highlighting the first gray hairs at his temples, something he got from me, his 67-year-old father. "Dad," he said with that calm, controlled voice he always used when he wanted something. "I've been thinking, starting with your next check, we're going to transfer all your money to my account. I'll manage everything for you." My mug stopped in midair. I looked at him, trying to process what I had just heard. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a declaration, as if the decision had already been made. "What do you mean? You'll manage everything, Marcus?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's simple." He smiled, that same smile he'd used since he was a boy, whenever he wanted to convince me of something. "You're 67 now. You work your whole life. Now you need to rest and not worry about bills, payments, financial management. I'll take care of all that for you." I set my cup down slowly. 40 years working as a hospital orderly in public facilities, raising a son alone after my ex walked out when Marcus was only 3. 40 years saving every dollar I could, living in apartments too small, wearing clothes until the color wore out, all to make sure my boy had what I never did: quality education, good clothes, and a life without the deprivation I knew too well. "I don't know, son. I've always handled my own money." "Exactly, Dad. You've always worked so hard. Now it's time for you to rest," he insisted, placing his hand over mine. "Let me take care of this. It's the least I can do after everything you did for me." His words sounded beautiful, maybe even sincere, but something inside me, a small distant voice, shouted a warning. Why now? Why everything? My pension wasn't huge, but over the years I'd put together a decent nest egg. I owned my home, small but comfortable, and had some savings. "I'll think about it," I finally replied. "There's not much to think about, Dad," he said. For an instant, a flash of irritation crossed his face before the smile returned. "It's for your own good. Trust me." Marcus left that afternoon, leaving behind an envelope with bank documents for me to sign, papers that would give him unrestricted access to my accounts. I spent hours staring at those pages, my heart heavy with doubt. That's when I started remembering little things. How Marcus, who earned 4 times my pension, never brought anything when he came to dinner every Friday with his wife, Tasha. How he'd borrowed money from me several times over the last few years and never paid it back. How the house he bought 2 years ago had expensive furniture I knew his salary alone couldn't cover. That night I did something I had never done before. I took out all my bank statements from the last 6 months and began analyzing them, line by line. And there it was, a cash withdrawal of $1,800 at a branch across town, done on a day I was working at the hospital, a withdrawal I had never made. My heart pounded as I kept searching. Another unknown withdrawal 2 months earlier, a transfer to an account I didn't recognize. With trembling hands, I grabbed my wallet. My debit card was there, as always. Then I remembered, 3 months earlier, Marcus had asked to borrow my bag for a few minutes while I showered, saying he needed to check a prescription I had written down. The truth hit me like a punch to the gut. My own son was stealing from me. The next morning, I went to the bank as soon as it opened. The young manager, no older than Marcus, looked at me with a mix of compassion and discomfort when I explained the situation. "Mr. Brooks, this happens more than you'd imagine," she said softly. "Family fraud is very common, especially against older adults. Do you want to file a formal complaint?" A formal complaint against my own son, the boy I'd cradled through fevered nights, for whom I'd stitched superhero costumes, whom I had fiercely defended from the world's injustices. I swallowed the knot in my throat. For now, I just want to change all my passwords and request new cards. I paused, and I'd like to check if there are other accounts or loans in my name. The investigation revealed what I feared most: a credit card I had never requested with a balance of $7,500, an electric utility account at an address that wasn't mine, the address of Marcus's house, and worst of all, a $15,000 personal loan in my name, taken out a year earlier, which had seriously damaged my credit history. I left the bank feeling as if I had aged 10 years that morning. I walked aimlessly through the streets, trying to understand how the child I had raised, whom I loved more than myself, had turned into this stranger who stole from his own father. When Marcus called that afternoon, I let it go to voicemail. His message was clear. "Dad, I'll swing by tonight to pick up the signed documents. I already set everything up so the transfer starts next month." That's when I made my decision. I spent the rest of the day making calls to a moving company, to an attorney recommended by the bank manager, and finally to a real estate agent. The next morning, when Marcus arrived at my place for the Friday dinner he never missed, after all, it was free home-cooked food. I was the one who surprised him. The house was completely empty. Marcus stood in the living room doorway, his face frozen in a mask of disbelief. His wife, Tasha, peered over his shoulder, eyes wide. "Dad, what happened? Where's the furniture? Where's the TV?" His voice wavered between concern and accusation. I sat in the only chair left in the house, a kitchen chair placed deliberately in the center of the empty living room. I smiled calmly, something I hadn't truly done in a long time. "I sold them," I said simply. "You sold? What do you mean you sold? Why?" Marcus moved through the room, looking around as if the furniture might be hiding somewhere. "I needed the money," I explained, keeping my voice steady. "If you're going to manage my finances, I figured I should make sure I have some cash on hand first." The confusion on his face dissolved quickly into fury, a kind of anger I'd never seen in him before, raw, uncontrolled, frightening. For a moment, I was afraid of my own son. "Are you crazy?" he shouted. "How are we supposed to watch TV when we come for dinner? How are we supposed to be comfortable here?" Those words were like a bolt of clarity. How are we supposed to be comfortable here? Not, "How are you going to be comfortable, Dad?" It was about their comfort, not mine. My home, my belongings existed only for their convenience. Tasha stepped forward, her heels clicking on the now bare hardwood floor. "Mr. Brooks, this is ridiculous. We come here every Friday to keep you company, to make sure you're okay. And this is how you repay us? Selfish." The unspoken word hung in the air between us. Me, the man who had given up having a life of his own so Marcus could have everything. The man who, for 37 years, put his son's needs above his own. The man who worked double shifts to pay for his college. Selfish. "Dinner isn't ready," I said evenly. "In fact, there's no dinner today. If you're hungry, you can eat somewhere else." The silence that followed was heavy. Marcus looked at me as if I were a stranger, and maybe I was a version of myself he'd never known, one I was only beginning to meet. "You need to think carefully about what you're doing," Marcus said finally, his voice cold and calculating. "A man your age alone, without family who truly cares, can end up in a bad place. I'm all you've got, Dad. You should remember that." The threat was poorly disguised, but instead of scaring me, it only confirmed what I already suspected. This was no longer the boy I raised. He was a man who saw his own father as a resource to exploit, a convenience, a bank account. They left, slamming the door. I heard the car start with a roar, and then, finally alone, I let out a long breath I didn't even know I'd been holding. In that moment of absolute silence, in a house empty of furniture but full of memories, I began to understand how deeply I had been betrayed. It wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the love, the sacred bond between father and son. Over the next week, Marcus called several times. I ignored every one. Instead, I followed the attorney's advice to the letter. First, I documented everything. Every unauthorized withdrawal, every fraudulent account, every penny taken without my knowledge. I made a binder with tabs, bank statements, branch surveillance timestamps, the utility bill at his address, the loan papers, and my name. When I totaled it all, the number knocked the wind out of me. $32,000 over 3 years. For some folks, it may not seem like much, but for me, it represented years of careful saving, of daily sacrifices, of choosing needs over wants because I couldn't afford both. As I organized the evidence, I relived my history with Marcus. The day he was born, red and outraged, as if protesting his arrival in the world. The nights I worked graveyard shifts at the hospital, leaving him with a neighbor because I had no other choice. The suitor I once turned down because she didn't want to help raise someone else's child. The years we shared a cramped one-bedroom, sleeping in the same bed until he was 8 because we couldn't afford more space. The expensive sneakers he begged for in high school that cost half my monthly pay, but I bought them so he wouldn't feel less than his classmates. The private college I financed with a loan that took me a decade to repay. The 5 years after graduation that he lived with me without contributing a dime, saving up, while I paid for everything. And how did he repay those years? By stealing from me as I started to age, treating my home like a free Friday restaurant, and planning to seize control of the little I'd managed to put aside. A week after the confrontation, Marcus showed up unannounced. He was calmer this time, wearing that rehearsed smile he used whenever he wanted to manipulate me. "Dad, let's talk like adults," he said. "You sold all the furniture on impulse. Clearly you're making poor decisions. This just proves you need my help." I looked at him, really looked at him, in a way I hadn't in a long time. I saw the vanity in his eyes, the designer clothes, the luxury watch on his wrist. I saw the man he'd become, not thanks to my sacrifices, but despite them. "Marcus," I said calmly, "I know about the withdrawals. I know about the credit card. I know about the electric account at your address. I know everything." The smile vanished from his face. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, but his voice shook. "I have the documents. I spoke with an attorney. What you did is fraud, Marcus. It's a crime." He went pale. "You wouldn't do this to me. I'm your son. Yes, you are my son. And because you are my son, I'll give you a choice you didn't give me. Either you return all the money you took, with interest, or I go to the police." His reaction was predictable. First denial, then rage. He paced, jaw tight, trying to tower over me like I'd cower at a shadow the way a boy once tried to intimidate his teacher. When he realized I wasn't budging, the threat slithered back in, thinly veiled. "You'll regret this. No one will believe you. They'll think you're senile, confused." I smiled, sad but steady. "I've got every statement, Marcus. I've got recordings of my conversations at the bank. I have documented proof of every cent you took. It's not my word against yours. It's you against the evidence." He stormed out, slamming the door so hard I thought the frame would crack. But this time I didn't feel guilty, and I didn't feel scared. I felt strong. In the days that followed, Marcus launched a smear campaign online. He posted about how his elderly father was getting confused, how he was only trying to help, and how painful it was to watch someone you love lose the ability to make decisions. His friends, and even some neighbors who'd known him since he was a kid, offered sympathy, sharing his posts and praising his patience. Nobody asked for my side of the story. That was the day I decided to stop being silent. The first step was a formal complaint at the bank. The second was initiating legal action for fraud. And the third, the hardest, was doing something I never thought I would. Pulling back the curtain on what Marcus had done. Not to humiliate him, but to protect myself and prevent further harm. Meanwhile, I transferred the sale money from the furniture to a new account at a different bank. I rented a small apartment in another part of town, far from Marcus and the painful memories. For the first time in decades, I started thinking about myself. What did I want for the rest of my life? What kind of future could I shape at 67, starting practically from scratch? The answer arrived in the form of a colorful flyer in the attorney's waiting room. Never too late to start again. It advertised a small business program for older adults. I held that bright sheet of paper for a long time, as if it might evaporate if I loosened my grip. Start again. I had never considered those words would apply to me at this age. The next 3 months were among the most intense and transformative of my life. While the legal process against Marcus moved slowly, I decided I wouldn't stand still. If I was beginning a new phase, I would do it with purpose and resolve. I enrolled in the program. On the first day, I sat in the back of a classroom filled with people my age or older, faces mapped with stories, hands that had built lives, folks who were there because they believed there was still more to create. "Why are you here?" asked the instructor, a middle-aged man with contagious energy. When my turn came, the words tumbled out before I could filter them. Because I realized I'd raised a thief, not a son. And now I need to figure out who I am besides being his father. There was a stunned silence, followed by something unexpected. Applause, nods of recognition, eyes that told me I wasn't alone. Many in that room were starting over after betrayals, losses, and disappointments. During the classes, I rediscovered a passion I had let sleep for decades. Before Marcus was born, I loved making sweets. My grandmother, a stern Alabama matriarch with skilled hands, taught me traditional recipes that I'd perfected over the years. But when life became a constant struggle to survive as a single father, that joy was replaced by necessity and fatigue. With encouragement from the instructors and classmates, I started making sweets again. At first, just to share in class. Then I accepted small orders. Peach cobbler with a tender crumb and caramel edges. Sweet potato pie with silk-smooth filling and a whisper of nutmeg. Pecan pralines that snapped and melted at once. Banana pudding layered with homemade wafers. Each dessert that left my hands felt like a declaration of independence. Every single sale, no matter how small, was mine, born from my skill, my creativity, my work. It was something Marcus couldn't take, because it came from who I am. Meanwhile, the legal process uncovered more layers of Marcus's betrayal. My attorney found he had used my name as a guarantor on a home improvement loan without my consent, made online purchases with cards registered to me, and systematically abused my trust in ways I hadn't even imagined. The evidence was irrefutable, and eventually Marcus's lawyers proposed a settlement. He would return the $32,000 he took, plus $10,000 in damages, and publicly acknowledge what he'd done, restoring my name and credit. When the news came, I was in the shared kitchen space I rented to bake at larger scale. My hands were dusted with flour, and the scent of vanilla and cinnamon floated in the air. Relief mingled with sorrow. Relief that justice would be done. Sorrow that no money could mend a broken bond between father and son. The night before the settlement was to be signed, Marcus called. After weeks of ignoring his attempts to reach me, I answered. His voice was different, lower, without the usual swagger. "Dad, can we talk before tomorrow?" "Just the two of us." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to believe he was genuinely remorseful, that the boy I had raised, whom I loved despite everything, was still somewhere inside the man who betrayed me. "About what, Marcus?" "About us. About rebuilding. I know I did terrible things, but you're my father. There'll always be an US, right?" I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his words. For nearly 4 decades, us meant my needs came after his, that my dreams could wait, that my life existed to serve his. "No, Marcus," I said at last. "There isn't an us the way you mean it. There's you, who needs to face the consequences of your choices, and there's me, who's finally learning to live for myself." He began to protest, to plead, to manipulate, the old rhythms ready to drag me back into the undertow. But something had changed in me. His words no longer had power over my mind or my decisions. "Tomorrow we meet at the attorney's office. Good night, Marcus." I hung up and went back to stirring custard for banana pudding. Each steady movement, whisking until the mixture coated the back of a spoon, felt like an affirmation. Every finished tray was a tangible reminder of what I could create with my own hands. The next morning, I signed the settlement without shedding a tear. Marcus avoided my eyes the entire meeting, answering in monosyllables when his lawyer prompted him. Tasha didn't show. When the attorneys left to make copies, we were alone for a few minutes, the quiet heavy between us. "Why did you do it, Marcus?" I finally asked, not with anger or accusation, but with genuine curiosity. "You had a good job, a nice house. Why steal from your own father?" He stared at the table, fingers tracing the wood grain. "I don't know," he muttered. "At first it was just one time. I needed to finish the down payment and came up short. I planned to put back, but then it got easy. You never asked. You never checked. The cruel simplicity of it hit me like a slap. I never asked. I never checked. Because I trusted him, unconditionally, because he was my son. And the Friday dinners, why come every week if you didn't even enjoy spending time with me? He shrugged, an indifferent gesture that told me everything I needed to know. It was convenient. It was free. It was a habit that benefited him, not me. When I walked out of that office with a substantial check and the promise my name would be cleared, I didn't feel the victory I expected. But I did feel something just as powerful, freedom. Freedom from the weight of disappointment, from betrayal, from false hope. In the months that followed, my small home-based sweet business began to grow faster than I dared imagine. At first, I sold a few pies and cobblers to neighbors and church members. Then, through word of mouth, local cafes started calling, asking if I could deliver trays of pecan pralines or banana pudding for the weekends. I created a page on social media, Mr. Brooks Southern Delights. To my surprise, it started gaining followers, especially after a local blogger wrote that my peach cobbler tasted like a memory you didn't know you'd lost. With the money from the settlement and the steady profit from my sales, I managed to rent a small apartment in a quiet neighborhood near the water. Nothing fancy, but all mine. I decorated it in warm colors, filled it with sunlight and the scent of vanilla. For the first time in decades, every decision, from the paint on the walls to the dishes in the cabinet, was mine alone. Marcus tried to contact me a few times after the settlement. He sent gifts on my birthday, messages on holidays, polite texts that said things like, "Hope you're doing okay, Dad." I answered courteously, but kept a firm boundary. Some friends didn't understand. "But he's your son," they'd say, eyes wide with disbelief. "Family is forever." I would smile gently and reply, "Yes, he's my son, and he'll always be." But love doesn't mean tolerating abuse. Love also means respect and limits. One Sunday afternoon, while preparing an order for a wedding, I received an unexpected visitor. Tasha stood at my door alone. She looked uncomfortable, out of place in her tailored dress among my simple furniture and flour-dusted counters. "Can I come in?" she asked softly. I hesitated, but curiosity outweighed caution. I invited her in and offered coffee, which she declined. "I thought you should know," she began, staring at her hands. "Marcus and I are getting divorced." Her words didn't surprise me as much as they should have. "I'm sorry," I said because it felt like the right thing to say. "Don't be," she replied with a sad smile. Turns out, I wasn't the only one he deceived. There were other women, hidden accounts, lies about money, about work, about everything. I nodded silently. The pattern was all too familiar. "I wanted to tell you that you were right to distance yourself," she continued. "Back then, I thought you were being cruel, selfish even. Now I understand." Somehow, that simple admission, coming from the woman who once called me ungrateful for standing up to her husband, brought a sense of validation I hadn't realized I still needed. "Thank you for telling me," I said sincerely. Before leaving, Tasha glanced around the kitchen, at the rows of neatly labeled jars and the trays of sweets cooling on the counter. "You look happy," she observed. "I am," I said, and it was true. Not in the way I once imagined I'd be at this age, but genuinely, quietly happy. After she left, I returned to my work, shaping truffles and glazing pecan tarts, every movement deliberate and peaceful. My life was simple, yet filled with purpose. A year passed since the settlement with Marcus. Autumn came again, bringing golden leaves swirling down the streets of my city. My little business had grown beyond my wildest expectations. Mr. Brooks Southern Delights wasn't just a social media page anymore. It was a real place, a small storefront downtown, with wide windows letting in sunlight that gleamed over displays of cakes, pies, and candies. That Monday morning, as I was rolling out dough for another batch of sweet potato pies, the doorbell jingled. It was too early for customers. Wiping my hands on my apron, I went to the front. To my surprise, it was James, my old neighbor from the neighborhood I'd left behind. We hadn't seen each other in nearly a year. "Henry," he exclaimed, spreading his arms. "Man, this place looks amazing." I laughed, hugging him warmly. James had been one of the few who hadn't taken sides when everything went public with Marcus. "Come on in," I said, leading him to the little coffee corner in the back of the shop. "You know I always got coffee brewing." We sat down with 2 steaming mugs. He caught me up on old neighborhood gossip, the new families that had moved in, the old grocery store that had turned into a gym, how Miss Parker's cat still roamed the block like she owned it. Listening to him felt strange and comforting, like revisiting a movie I'd once loved but no longer lived inside of. "And Marcus?" he asked finally, his tone careful. "Heard from him?" I shook my head. "Not much. We've kept our distance." "I heard he sold the house after the divorce," James said. "Moved out of town. Got some new job. Beyond that, can't say." I nodded, taking a slow sip of coffee. It was the hardest thing I ever did, cutting contact with my own son, I admitted, gazing out the window at the people walking by. But also the most necessary. Sometimes you have to remove toxic people from your life, especially when they're family, because family can hurt you deeper than anyone else. James studied me for a moment, then smiled. "You look lighter, man. Happier. Like you finally put the weight down." I returned the smile. "That's because I finally learned I deserve more than leftovers. For most of my life, I put myself last, first out of necessity, raising him alone, then out of habit. And then it became a trap. The trap of thinking love meant constant sacrifice, that being a good father meant never saying no, that getting old meant accepting any scrap of attention your kids give you, even if it comes with manipulation." James nodded thoughtfully. "You're preaching, brother. More of us need to hear that." We talked until the first customers came in. He bought a box of pralines before leaving, promising to spread the word about my shop. That afternoon, as I wiped down the counters, I reflected on how far I'd come. It hadn't been easy. There were nights I cried quietly, missing Marcus despite everything, feeling that hollow ache where fatherhood once lived. There were mornings I almost picked up the phone to call him, to beg for peace, just to stop the silence. But then I'd remember the forged documents, the stolen money, the cold calculation in his eyes that day in my living room, and I'd stop. I wasn't being cruel. I was protecting myself. The first month after the settlement had been the toughest. I used part of the money to rent time in a shared kitchen, baking 3 days a week. At first, I sold less than I spent. I almost convinced myself I'd made a mistake, that I was too old to start over. Then I met Mrs. Collins, an 80-year-old woman who made fruit preserves in that same shared kitchen. One day, as I complained about slow sales, she adjusted her glasses and said bluntly, "Mr. Brooks, how old are you?" 67, I said. She snorted. "You can live 20, 30 more years if you're lucky. You're going to spend that time whining about what you lost, or you're going to build something new." Her sharpness startled me, but it was exactly what I needed. The following week, I invested in better packaging, printed business cards, and started promoting my work more actively. The turning point came when Ms. Denise, the owner of a cozy downtown cafe, tried my sweet potato pie. She ordered a batch for her shop and invited me to participate in a local food festival. It was there that everything changed. People lined up for samples of my cobbler and pralines. A local influencer tried my banana pudding, posted about it, and within days my page flooded with messages. Orders began pouring in, first a few a week, then several a day. Within 6 months, I had enough to rent my own storefront, the little shop that now smelled like butter, brown sugar, and redemption. That night, after James left and the last customer walked out, I flipped the sign to closed. I was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that comes from building something with your own hands. I walked home under the soft glow of streetlights, a 15-minute stroll I took every night to unwind. I passed a small park where older men played dominoes and children chased each other under the watchful eyes of grandparents. Sometimes, watching them, a small ache would rise in my chest. I wondered if I'd ever have grandkids, if Marcus would ever have a family of his own, if there was still a chance for us to reconcile. But then I'd remind myself that life doesn't follow the scripts we imagine. Sometimes the stories we think are over need to be rewritten. My happy ending wasn't a perfect family reunion. It was the quiet joy of knowing who I was again, of owning my peace. It was in the smiles of customers who bit into my pies, in the friendships I'd formed with suppliers and other small business owners, and in the simple freedom of making choices that were mine alone. When I got home, I found a white envelope in my mailbox. No return address, just my name, Henry Brooks, written in handwriting I knew instantly. Marcus's. For a long moment, I stood there, the envelope heavy in my hand, as if it contained something alive, something dangerous. Part of me wanted to tear it up unread. Another part, a quieter, more tender part, wanted to believe it might hold a sign of true remorse. I climbed the stairs to my apartment, placed the envelope on the kitchen table, and went about my evening. Made tea, took a shower, fixed a small dinner. But the envelope sat there, waiting, silent and patient, until finally I sat down, took a breath, and opened it. Inside the envelope was a handwritten letter and an old photograph. The photo showed me holding baby Marcus in my arms, both of us smiling at the camera. The tired, proud smile of a young father who thought love alone could protect them from the world. My eyes in that photo were full of hope. His barely open, innocent and unaware of the storms ahead. The letter was brief. Dad, I don't expect forgiveness, not even a reply. I just wanted you to know that I started therapy 6 months ago. I'm trying to understand why I did what I did, why I hurt the person who sacrificed the most for me. My therapist says it will take years, not months, to rebuild trust if it's ever possible. He says I first have to become someone worthy of it. I saw your shop online. It looks incredible. I always knew you made the best desserts in the world. I'm proud of you, even if I don't deserve to be. Marcus, I read the letter over and over, waiting to spot manipulation or excuses. But there weren't any. No plea for money, no justification, no hidden agenda. Just remorse, quiet and unadorned. I slipped the letter into the drawer where I kept important papers. I didn't respond. I wasn't ready. Maybe I never would be. But something shifted in me that night. A knot of bitterness I hadn't even realized I was carrying began to loosen. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but a recognition that people can change, that the future was unwritten, that life still had the power to surprise me at 68. The following spring brought an unexpected dilemma, the best kind, the kind born from success. My business was growing too fast for me to handle alone. Between supplying 3 cafes, a local grocery, and a small delicatessen, I could barely keep up. For the first time in my life, I needed help. The thought made me nervous. I'd spent most of my working years following orders, answering to doctors and supervisors in hospitals. As a father, my role had been to care, to provide, to serve. I'd never been a boss before. "You're overthinking it," said Denise, the cafe owner who'd become both a friend and mentor. We were sitting in her shop over our weekly breakfast, a ritual we'd started months earlier. Hire someone. Teach them your recipes. You can't do it all yourself. I stirred my coffee uneasy. These recipes are all I have, Denise. What if the person steals them? What if they open their own place and leave me behind? She laughed, shaking her head. First, that's unlikely. And second, even if someone tried, nobody can bake like you, Henry. There's something in your touch that can't be copied. She was right. Denise was always right. Still, I hesitated. The fear wasn't just about recipes. It was about trust. After what Marcus had done, trusting anyone felt like jumping without a parachute. But running the shop alone was becoming impossible. So, a week later, I put a small sign in the front window. Now hiring assistant baker. Experience welcome, passion required. I interviewed 5 people. All were capable, but one stood out. A young woman named Maya, 24, recently graduated from culinary school. There was a spark in her eyes when she talked about pastry, the kind of genuine enthusiasm that couldn't be faked. "Why this shop?" I asked. "With your degree, you could go to fancy restaurants or hotels." She smiled. "Because those places care about quantity, not heart. Here it feels real. I want to learn from someone who puts love into what they make." I hired her that same day. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd ever made. Maya brought more than an extra pair of hands. She brought energy, curiosity, and a modern touch I hadn't realized my business needed. While I specialized in classics, sweet potato pie, cobbler pralines, she suggested new twists, bourbon pecan cupcakes, banana pudding parfaits, peach cobbler cheesecakes. She knew how to use social media better than I ever could. "Mr. Brooks," she said one morning, camera in hand, "we need to film you making pies. People love watching the process." I laughed. Nobody wants to watch an old man with gray hair and wrinkles bake pies. "You're wrong," she said, shaking her head. "That's exactly what they want. Real people. Real stories. Everyone's tired of perfect influencers who can't even crack an egg." So, reluctantly, I let her film. She edited the video with gentle music and captions explaining each step. Rolling the dough, folding in butter, sprinkling cinnamon. Within 2 days, it had over 5,000 views. The comments poured in. "Reminds me of my granddad's kitchen. I can smell the butter through the screen. Your story inspires me." Maya grinned when she showed me. "See, you're not just a baker, you're a storyteller." Her words lingered with me. I began including little cards with each order, describing the history of a recipe, where I learned it, what memories it held. Customers loved it. They didn't just buy dessert, they bought a piece of history, a connection. 6 months after Maya joined, the shop expanded. We rented the space next door and turned it into a small cafe where customers could sit, sip coffee, and enjoy fresh pies straight from the oven. We hired 2 more people, an older woman named Mrs. Lee to handle front service, and a quiet young man named Darius to help with prep and cleanup. My routine changed. Instead of baking every single pastry myself, I supervised, taught, and planned. The worry shifted from, "Will anyone come in today?" to, "Can we keep up with all these orders?" From the fear of failure to the challenge of success. One busy Friday afternoon, while I was showing Mrs. Lee how to pack pralines for shipping, Maya appeared at the kitchen door, looking uneasy. "Mr. Brooks," she said softly, "there's a man asking for you. Says he's your son." The words hit me like a jolt. My heart stopped for a moment. It had been nearly 2 years since our last face-to-face meeting. 1 year and a half since the settlement. 1 year since his letter. "Tell him I'm busy," I said automatically, old caution taking over. Maya hesitated. "He looks nervous," she said. "Says he only needs 5 minutes." I took a deep breath, my pulse quickening. Part of me wanted to stay hidden behind the safety of my kitchen. But another part, the stronger one, knew I couldn't hide forever. "Tell him I'll meet him in the cafe in 5 minutes, I said. I used the time to compose myself. I washed my hands, removed my apron, combed my white hair, and looked in the mirror of the small restroom. The face staring back was older, yes, but calmer, more grounded than the man who had once sat trembling over forged signatures. When I entered the cafe, Marcus was sitting by the window, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes darting nervously outside. He looked thinner, older. There were faint lines around his mouth that hadn't been there before. "Hello, Marcus," I said, taking the seat across from him. He looked up, startled, then managed a faint smile. "Dad, you look different." "I am different," I said simply. "What is it you wanted?" He seemed thrown by my directness. The old Marcus would have dominated the conversation, twisting it his way. This Marcus seemed unsure. "I just wanted to see you," he said finally. "To see how you're doing. The place looks amazing. I never imagined you'd be capable of building something like this." I finished for him. He winced. "No, I mean, you always seemed so tired before. Resigned. But now you look alive." I gave a small nod. "I am." For a while we sat in silence. Maya appeared briefly, setting down 2 cups of coffee and a plate of samples. "On the house," she said with a polite smile, glancing at me as if to check I was okay. I nodded reassuringly. Marcus took a sip of coffee, exhaled slowly. "I'm still in therapy," he said. 2 years now. It's been hard, confronting who I am, what I did." "Why did you do it, Marcus?" I asked quietly, the question that had haunted me for years. He stared into the dark liquid of his cup. "At first, it was convenience. You were there, trusting, easy to take from. Later, it became something else, entitlement, I guess. I started believing that what you had was partly mine by right. The blunt honesty stung, yet there was strange relief in it. Finally, truth without manipulation. The therapist says I've got narcissistic traits. He continued, that I grew up thinking the world existed to serve me, that you existed to serve me. I never learned empathy. I nodded slowly. It made a cruel kind of sense. I didn't come here to ask for forgiveness, he said, voice trembling slightly. Some things go beyond forgiveness. I just wanted you to know I'm trying to change, that I recognize the damage I caused. I looked at him carefully. This wasn't the same arrogant man who once threatened me in my own home. This was someone humbled, human, aware of his own brokenness. I'm glad you're seeking help, I said quietly. He smiled weakly, eyes shining. Thank you. I didn't expect you to even see me. I just needed to say that I'm sorry for everything. Something shifted between us in that moment. It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, an acknowledgement that we were both changing, both learning to live beyond the wreckage. He reached for a praline, took a bite, and smiled faintly. Still the best in town, he said. You used to make these on Sunday nights when I was little. The memory surfaced instantly. Marcus, 6 years old, perched on a stool, licking the spoon while I stirred caramel on the stove. A simple moment before money and pride poisoned everything. Would you like to see the kitchen? I asked impulsively. See how we do it now. His eyes lit up with genuine surprise. I'd like that, he said. I led him to the back, introduced him to the staff, showed him the new equipment, the mixing stations, the trays cooling on racks. He looked around with quiet awe, nodding respectfully. You built something incredible here, Dad, he said as we returned to the cafe. I'm proud of you. Thank you, I said. And then, after a pause, if you'd like, you can stop by sometime for coffee, just to talk. It wasn't a promise of reconciliation, just a possibility of something new, built on respect instead of dependence, on boundaries instead of sacrifice. I'd like that, he said, voice thick with emotion. When he left, there were no dramatic hugs, no grand declarations, just a quiet nod between two people who had finally stopped pretending and started to see each other clearly. Back in the kitchen, Maya asked gently, Everything okay, Mr. Brooks? I smiled, feeling a strange peace settle over me. Yes, I said, picking up the rolling pin. Everything's fine. And it was. The kind of fine that comes when you finally reclaim your life and realize that peace, not perfection, is what healing really looks like. The next few weeks after Marcus's visit were quiet, almost too quiet. He hadn't called or stopped by again, and I didn't reach out either. There was a delicate balance between us now, like a glass bridge suspended over a deep canyon. One wrong step and everything could shatter again. But that fragile peace, however uncertain, was better than the silence of hatred that had filled the previous years. I poured myself into work. The shop continued to thrive, and with Maya's help, we launched a new line of gift boxes for the holidays. She designed the packaging herself, white boxes tied with gold string, each containing an assortment of sweets and a handwritten thank you card. We sold out within days. Customers began calling from neighboring towns asking if we shipped. You realize, Maya said one morning while tallying receipts, you've basically built a brand. I laughed. A brand? I just bake pies. She rolled her eyes. You bake stories, Mr. Brooks. That's why people keep coming back. The recipes are great, but it's your heart they taste. Her words touched something in me. For most of my life, I'd felt invisible, just another tired hospital worker, a father doing his best. Now, people recognize my name, not because I was someone's parent, but because of something I created. It was a kind of rebirth. Still, as Christmas approached, a small ache began to stir, the ache of loneliness that holidays bring to those who have lost more than they care to admit. The shop was full of warmth and laughter, but when I went home to my quiet apartment at night, the silence pressed in like winter fog. I tried to fill it with music, with baking, with movies, but none of it compared to what I once imagined the holidays would be. A noisy house, a family gathered around the table, grandchildren running through the living room, One evening, as I was closing the shop, I found an envelope slipped under the door. My first thought was that it was another order, but inside was a small Christmas card. "Merry Christmas, Dad. I know we're not there yet, but I'd like to invite you to dinner on Christmas Eve. Just me, no one else." Marcus, I stared at the card for a long time. My first instinct was to decline. The wounds were still tender, the past still too close. But something about his handwriting, steady, almost careful, made me pause. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was offering a chance for peace. After a sleepless night of debating with myself, I wrote back, "Marcus, thank you for the invitation. I'll come, but let's keep it simple. No gifts, no big expectations. Just dinner." Dad, Christmas Eve arrived cold and bright. The air smelled of pine and wood smoke. I closed the shop early, handed out small boxes of pralines to my staff, and wished them a happy holiday. Maya gave me a quick hug before leaving. "You got this, Mr. Brooks," she said with a wink. Marcus lived in a small apartment on the edge of town now, nothing like the big house he'd once shared with Tasha. When he opened the door, I was surprised to see the place modest but tidy, decorated with a small tree in the corner and soft lights strung along the window. "Hey, Dad," he said, smiling nervously. "Come in." The smell of roasted chicken filled the air, simple, homemade, not takeout. On the table sat 2 plates, neatly arranged, and a bottle of sparkling cider. He'd even lit candles. "I wasn't sure what you like these days," he said as we sat down. "So I made what I remembered from when I was a kid: roast chicken, mashed potatoes, and green beans." I smiled faintly. "You remembered right." The meal was quiet at first, the conversation hesitant, but not strained. We talked about the shop, his therapy, how life had slowed down for both of us. He told me he'd gotten a job as an assistant project manager for a small construction company. "It's not glamorous," he said, "but it's honest. I like it." I nodded. Honest work has a way of rebuilding more than just your wallet. Halfway through dinner, he put down his fork and looked at me seriously. "Dad, I know you didn't come here for apologies. You've heard enough of those. But I need to say something." I gestured for him to continue. "When Mom left, I remember how angry I was. I blamed you. I thought she left because of you, because you weren't enough. But as I got older, I realized she didn't leave because of you. She left because of herself. And somehow, I started treating you like she did, like you owed me for her absence." His voice trembled slightly, and for a moment, he looked like that boy I used to hold when nightmares woke him in the middle of the night. "I didn't know how to love without taking," he said. "I'm still learning how." I felt something deep in my chest loosen, like a door creaking open after years of being stuck. "Marcus," I said softly, "I spent most of my life blaming myself for her leaving too. I thought if I just worked harder, gave you more, maybe you'd never feel that loss. Maybe I could protect you from it. But in doing that, I forgot to teach you something important. That love isn't about debt. It's about respect." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. "I know that now." We sat in silence for a long time, the kind that feels like healing instead of distance. After dinner, he handed me a small box wrapped in brown paper. "I know we said no gifts," he said sheepishly. "But this isn't really a gift. It's something I found." Inside was an old wristwatch, mine, the one I'd thought I'd lost years ago. The leather strap was worn, the face slightly scratched, but it still ticked faintly. "I pawned it," Marcus said quietly, "a long time ago when I needed cash. After everything that happened, I went back and bought it. It took me months to find the shop again, but I did. I've kept it ever since, waiting for the right time to give it back." I ran my thumb over the scratched glass. The same watch that had seen me through decades of hospital shifts, through raising a boy alone, through heartbreak and survival. "Thank you," I whispered. He smiled faintly. "It still works, you know." "Yes," I said, fastening it to my wrist. "It does." When I left that night, the snow had started to fall, soft, slow flakes that melted as they touched the ground. Marcus walked me to my car. Before I got in, he said, "Dad, I don't expect you to ever forget what I did, but I hope one day you can remember me without pain." I looked at him for a long moment. I already can, I said. And for the first time, I meant it. The drive home was quiet, the streets nearly empty, the city lights glowing through the snow. I thought about how strange forgiveness could be. Not loud or dramatic, but quiet, patient, like the steady ticking of a watch that never truly stopped working, even after years of neglect. Over the following months, Marcus and I began to rebuild something small but real. He came by the shop occasionally, always helping without asking for anything in return, fixing a broken shelf, painting a wall, carrying heavy boxes. The staff liked him, though I could tell Maya kept a cautious eye, protective of me. He's different now, I told her one evening after he left. I can see that, she said. But just promise me one thing, Mr. Brooks. What's that? Don't lose yourself again trying to fix someone else, even if it's your son. Her words struck deep, a reminder that healing didn't mean erasing boundaries. That night, I stayed late at the shop, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint scent of caramel filling the air. I looked around, the shining counters, the walls we'd painted, the trays cooling on the racks, and realized something profound. Everything I'd built had come from pain that I'd refused to let define me. And maybe that was the real inheritance I had to pass on. Not money, not property, but proof that you could start over at any age, that you could rebuild after betrayal, that life doesn't end when trust breaks. It begins again when courage takes its place. Outside, snowflakes drifted past the window. I took off my watch and listened to its soft ticking on the counter. Time moved forward, steady and unyielding, just like me. By the time spring came again, it had been 3 years since the day I discovered my son's betrayal, and 1 year since our quiet Christmas dinner. The world looked different now, not because it had changed, but because I had. The shop, Mr. Brooks' Southern Delights, had become something of a local landmark. People didn't just come for the sweets anymore. They came for the atmosphere, for the warmth, for the sense of home it carried. We hosted small baking classes on weekends, community gatherings, and even a few charity events. My story had traveled farther than I ever expected. A local newspaper wrote a feature about me. The man who turned betrayal into a bakery. At first, I was embarrassed by the attention, but the article brought even more customers. It also brought letters, dozens of them, from strangers who had been through similar pain. Children betrayed by parents, parents betrayed by children, spouses deceived by partners. They thanked me for giving them hope, for showing that rebuilding was possible. I kept every letter in a wooden box by my desk. On difficult days, I'd open it, reread a few, and remind myself why I kept going. Marcus visited every few weeks now. Always polite, never overstepping. We didn't talk about the past much anymore, though its shadow was never far. He'd help fix things around the shop, drink coffee, and tell me about his therapy sessions or the books he was reading. He was quieter these days, humbler. One afternoon, he showed up with a hesitant smile. "Dad, I want to ask you something," he said. "Not a favor, an idea." I wiped my hands on a towel and gestured for him to continue. "You know how people love your desserts," he began nervously. "What if we made an online store? You could ship your pies and pralines across the country. I could handle the logistics, the website, packaging, orders. You'd stay in control, of course, but I think it could work." For a moment, I said nothing. The old fear flickered, the part of me that remembered forged signatures and drained accounts. Trust didn't grow back overnight, even after apologies. He must have seen the hesitation in my face, because he added quickly, "All funds go directly into your business account. I just handle setup, nothing else. I want to help, Dad, but this time for you, not at your expense." I studied him. His voice didn't carry the arrogance it once had. There was no manipulation, no pushiness, just a genuine desire to contribute. "Let's start small," I said finally. "A trial run. A few products, limited orders." The relief on his face was immediate, and in that moment, I realized something important. Forgiving someone doesn't mean you forget. It means you stop letting the past control your present. Over the next few weeks, we worked together again for the first time in decades. He came to the shop on evenings after his job, laptop in hand, explaining web design and shipping systems with the patience of someone trying to earn, not demand trust. Maya helped too, suggesting branding ideas and overseeing photography. She was cautious at first, but gradually she warmed to Marcus, watching closely but fairly. One evening, after Marcus left, she turned to me and said, "He's really trying, isn't he?" "Yes," I said softly, "and I'm trying too." The website launched in early summer. To our amazement, orders started pouring in from across the country: New York, Chicago, even a small cafe in Oregon that wanted to stock our pralines. It was overwhelming, but exhilarating. A local TV station reached out for an interview. The reporter asked me, "Mr. Brooks, after everything you've been through, what gave you the strength to start again?" I thought for a moment before answering. Pain can destroy you or refine you. I chose to let it refine me. I lost my savings, my trust, and almost my faith in love. But I found something better: purpose, and maybe even a new beginning with my son. The segment aired that weekend. I didn't expect much from it, but the response was huge. Our website traffic doubled. Customers came to the shop, saying they'd been moved to tears. Even more letters arrived, some handwritten, others emailed, sharing stories of reconciliation and courage. But not all responses were easy. Among the comments online were a few bitter ones. Strangers who wrote, "Once a thief, always a thief." Others said I was a fool for letting Marcus near my business again. Those words stung more than I wanted to admit. Late at night, I'd lie awake replaying old memories, wondering if they were right. Could people really change? Or was I setting myself up for another heartbreak? One evening, I closed the shop late and found Marcus still there, sorting boxes for shipping. "You should have gone home hours ago," I said. He looked up and smiled wearily. "Just wanted to make sure tomorrow's orders were ready." I hesitated, then spoke the truth that had been gnawing at me. "Some people say I'm foolish for trusting you again." Marcus froze. The silence stretched. Then he said quietly, "They might be right." That answer surprised me. He set down a box and looked straight at me. "I don't expect anyone to believe I've changed, Dad. I wouldn't either. I did horrible things. But I can spend the rest of my life making sure I never do them again." Something in his tone, the steadiness, the humility, disarmed me completely. I walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. "That's all I needed to hear." He nodded, eyes shining. "I'm not asking for trust, Dad. I'm earning it, one day at a time." That night, after he left, I stayed behind, sitting alone in the quiet shop. The lights from the display case cast soft reflections on the walls, and I thought about how strange life could be. Years ago, this same son had nearly ruined me. Now, he was helping me reach dreams I hadn't even dared to imagine. Maybe redemption didn't come all at once. It came in small acts of honesty, repeated until they built something solid. The next months were a blur of work and growth. We shipped hundreds of orders nationwide, and the shop became a symbol of resilience. I was invited to speak at a local community college about entrepreneurship later in life. Standing before that crowd of students, I felt a tremor of nerves. But when I spoke, my words flowed like they had been waiting for years to be said. I started over at 67. I told them, "You're never too old to begin again, and it's never too late to stop being the victim of your own story. You can rewrite it, one choice, one step at a time." The applause that followed wasn't just for my story. It was for the possibility that every person in that room could change their own. A few weeks later, something remarkable happened. I received a letter from the bank, the same one that had once uncovered Marcus's fraud. Inside was a note from the young manager who had helped me back then. "Mr. Brooks, I saw your interview. You probably don't remember me, but I was the manager who handled your case years ago. Seeing how far you've come reminded me why I took this job in the first place, to help people find hope again. Thank you for reminding me that even broken trust can heal." I folded the letter carefully and added it to my box of keepsakes. By late summer, the online business was thriving. Marcus handled everything with precision and transparency, sending me detailed reports each week. For the first time in years, I felt what I once thought impossible: peace not born from solitude, but from cooperation, from shared growth. One evening, as we closed up, he lingered by the door. "Dad, I've been thinking," he said. "Would you ever consider opening a second shop? Maybe one I could manage?" You'd still own it, of course, but I smiled before he could finish. Let's take it one step at a time, son. I've learned not to rush what's worth building. He laughed softly. Fair enough. That night, after he left, I sat by the window watching the last customers disappear into the dusk. The smell of baked sugar and vanilla hung in the air, comforting and familiar. I realized something then. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a continuous choice, like tending dough that needs patience to rise. And maybe, for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what tomorrow would bring. I turned off the lights, locked the door, and whispered to myself as I stepped into the cool night air. We're both still rising. By the time I turned 70, the shop had grown beyond anything I could have imagined in my younger years. Mr. Brooks' Southern Delights wasn't just a bakery anymore. It was a cornerstone of the community. Tourists stopped by on their way through town just to taste our sweet potato pies or the pralines that had become our signature. Locals called it the heart of Jefferson Avenue. Every morning, I unlocked the doors at dawn, the smell of sugar and butter greeting me like an old friend. Maya usually arrived a few minutes later, humming as she set up the displays. Marcus managed the online orders now, coordinating shipments with precision and care. I watched him sometimes, moving quietly between the back office and the storage room, and I'd think to myself how far we had both come, from betrayal to trust, from pain to partnership. It was a calm, steady rhythm, one I'd never expected to find again. Then, one afternoon in early autumn, Maya came into my office with a bright smile and a clipboard in hand. Mr. Brooks, she said, we've been invited to the Southern Food Festival in Atlanta. They want you to do a live baking demonstration. I blinked, surprised. Atlanta? That's a big deal. Exactly, she said, almost bouncing with excitement. This is huge publicity. You'd be representing the state. They even said they'd cover the travel expenses. The idea both thrilled and terrified me. I'd never spoken in front of more than a classroom or a small crowd, but something inside whispered, why not? 2 months later, I found myself standing under the bright white tents of the festival, surrounded by the scent of barbecue smoke, cinnamon, and fried dough. A crowd had gathered to watch as I rolled pie crusts and stirred pecan filling. Maya filmed everything for our website, while Marcus handed out samples with practiced charm. When the demonstration ended, people lined up not just to taste, but to talk, to thank me for my story, for my honesty. One woman in her 50s took my hand and said softly, my daughter stole from me too. I thought I'd never recover, but you showed me I can start again. Her words nearly undid me. That was the moment I realized the bakery wasn't my true legacy. It was the message behind it. After the festival, everything accelerated. The online business doubled again, and we were featured in a small documentary about second chances. I gave several talks at community centers, sharing what I'd learned about elder financial abuse, forgiveness, and rebuilding trust. Each time I spoke, I saw faces light up, people recognizing their own struggles and mine. One evening, after a particularly emotional event, Marcus approached me backstage. Dad, he said quietly, watching you talk, it makes me realize how much pain I caused, and how lucky I am that you didn't let it destroy you. I looked at him for a long moment. You didn't destroy me, Marcus. You just forced me to rebuild. He smiled faintly. And you built something better. Life had a way of bringing everything full circle. A year later, Maya came to me with an idea that made me pause. Mr. Brooks, she said, I think it's time we make this partnership official. You've been teaching me everything you know, and I want to keep this going for decades more. Let me buy in. Make me your business partner. At first, my old fear whispered again, that word trust echoing in my head like a fragile note. But when I looked at her, I didn't see danger. I saw dedication, loyalty, someone who had stood by me through every rise and fall. All right, I said finally, smiling. 51% me, 49% you. Deal. She laughed, eyes shining. Deal. That night, I stayed late, sitting by the display case after everyone left. I thought about how much life had changed since the day Marcus first took what wasn't his. I thought about all the times I'd felt broken, small, and invisible. And then I looked around the shop I'd built. The warm lights, the polished counters, the smell of pralines, and realized that broken things could become even more beautiful once repaired. In time, Marcus met someone new, a kind woman named Leah who worked as a school counselor. A year later, they married in a small ceremony, and when they had a little girl, they named her Hope. The first time I held her, I felt something inside me heal completely. "Hi, Hope," I whispered, brushing a finger over her tiny hand. "I'm your granddad. I'm going to teach you how to make pies one day." As she grew, she became a regular fixture at the bakery, helping Maya decorate cookies, playing with measuring spoons on the counter. The laughter she brought into my life was a kind of redemption no court, no money, no words could ever have given me. One afternoon, while Hope sat on a stool beside me, rolling dough clumsily, Marcus stood watching with a soft smile. "She talks about you all the time," he said. "Her granddad, the baker, her hero." I chuckled. Hero's a strong word. I'm just a man who refused to stay broken. He shook his head. "No, Dad, you're more than that. You taught me what rebuilding really means." There were still scars between us. There always would be. But they no longer defined us. They were just part of the story, like cracks in a well-loved recipe card. As the years rolled on, we expanded again, opening a second shop in Savannah. Maya took the lead on that one, running it with the same spirit and care. I split my time between both locations, still baking, still teaching. Retirement never tempted me. Work wasn't a burden anymore, it was joy. When I turned 72, the local paper ran another story. From broken trust to beloved bakery, the journey of Henry Brooks. The headline made me laugh, but the truth behind it brought quiet pride. That weekend, Marcus, Leah, and Hope surprised me with a small celebration at the shop. The whole team was there, Maya, the staff, even Denise, my mentor from the cafe days. There was music, laughter, and a giant cake shaped like a pie. During the toast, Marcus stood up, glass in hand. "Dad," he said, voice trembling slightly, "you once told me that forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means refusing to let the past own you. I want you to know that you didn't just forgive me. You showed me how to live differently. Because of you, Hope's going to grow up in a world where love and accountability coexist. You changed our family story." He raised his glass. "To second chances, and to my father, the man who taught me what real love looks like." Applause filled the room, and I felt tears well in my eyes. For the first time, I realized I had become what I never thought I could be again, whole. Later that night, after everyone left, I stood alone in the quiet bakery. The lights cast a golden glow over the display cases, and the hum of the refrigerator filled the air. On the wall hung a framed photo of me, Marcus, and little Hope. 3 generations bound not by perfection, but by perseverance. I thought back to the man I used to be, the one who let guilt and fear dictate every decision. That man was gone. In his place stood someone who had learned that strength wasn't about holding on. It was about letting go with grace. The watch Marcus had returned years ago still ticked steadily on my wrist. I listened to its rhythm, each beat reminding me that time had never been my enemy. It had been my teacher. Before turning off the lights, I whispered the same words I said every night before leaving. "Thank you. Thank you for the pain that taught me endurance. Thank you for the betrayal that led to freedom. Thank you for the second chance that became my legacy." Outside, the night air was cool, the moon hanging low over Jefferson Avenue. I locked the door behind me, taking one last look at the shop, the little world I had built from ashes and determination. Life, I realized, is a recipe we keep rewriting. Sometimes it burns, sometimes it overflows. But if we keep stirring, keep believing, it can still turn out sweet. And as I walked home under the streetlights, the scent of sugar and memory still clinging to my clothes, I smiled. Because I knew that, even at 72, I was still rising.